glad to be back for another week and another step in the journey that we're on. It's been a pretty busy week for me with work, and then I attended a leadership conference at the end of this week. Still trying to wrap my head around everything that I took in there. Someone has said it's like drinking from a fire hose. I hope everyone else had a good week, and it's just been good since the last time we gathered. So step 5, eh? That's a big one, isn't it? We're really putting rubber to the road at this point in our journey, aren't we? Can anyone tell me what step 5 is?
Something about telling someone else that you trust all of your stuff that you've written out in step 4.
It's a good summary here. The way it's written up in the AA steps basically says that. It says we admit it to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. So step 5, a bit frightening. Admitting or confessing something really puts them in your face, doesn't it? Okay, we can decide to confess something to God. He is all about forgiveness, so that has the prospect of going well. Admitting something to ourselves might be harder, but we can struggle through that. But admitting our deepest, darkest secrets to someone else, a living, breathing person who can think and judge like we do, that's pretty frightening, isn't it? If we're really honest, we'd probably prefer to do anything else but that, wouldn't we? When we get to this step, I think it's good to remember why we started this journey, what we are hoping and striving for. The name of this series is Life Steps, a Restorative Journey. It's not Life Steps, a journey from A to B, or Life Steps, a tourist guide to heaven. We set out on this journey, if you remember, 5 weeks ago, with the recognition that life had become unmanageable and that we were powerless to change that ourselves. It was that humbling recognition that, left to our own devices, we screw things up. And that led us to start this journey, didn't it? We wanted something more, and these steps, this 12-step journey, when taken seriously and acted upon, tantalized us with a promise of restoration, didn't it? So when faced with the frightening prospect of confession today, in this 5th step, I encourage us to take heart and to trust in the journey. Trust in the promise of restoration and the promise of Jesus to be with us each step of this journey. It's all right to be scared. That is a natural instinct meant to awaken us and prepare us to respond and act upon things. Being scared is only bad when it immobilizes us and doesn't allow us to take the next step. So in entering into this step, we need to embrace our fear, carry it with us, and allow it to move us to take the next step. And if we're not a bit afraid, I'd have to question how honest we're being, and if we're really putting anything on the line, risking anything on the promise of something better. So with that being said, let's dig in. And we started this journey with the recognition that we needed help, and that this help must come from outside ourselves, didn't we? Whenever we ran things, we found ourselves on a road to nowhere, and we came to believe that perhaps God had a better roadmap than us, if we would allow ourselves some direction. Now, as guys in particular, we know that's a very hard thing to do, to pull over and ask for directions. But we were never going to get there unless we did, were we? So we decided to give our lives into the care of God, to follow His roadmap. So, decision made. Not our will, but your will be done. And we're going to trust in the process. That's faith, by the way. So what was the first thing asked of us once we got on board? What was the step that led us here today? Step 4 was we made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves, didn't we? We looked at our pasts and tried to objectively identify places we'd gone off the path, hurting ourselves and others. Places where we consciously and unconsciously choose to exercise our will and not the will of a loving God. We looked at what it is about us that seems to guide our actions, to lead us astray. Getting honest with ourselves and really looking in the mirror was a scary step too, wasn't it? And that's two with a T-O-O, not T-W-O, so I'm confusing. Perhaps we hadn't looked at our reflection for quite some time, and we're afraid of what we might find. But we resolved in the previous step, didn't we, to trust in the process, to trust in one who can see better than us. So we did it, didn't we? And it wasn't ultimately as bad as we thought it was. Our fear didn't paralyze us. God didn't abandon us. And we're still on this path of restoration, aren't we? And looking forward to the brighter future promised us, are we not? Good. Now, I put a quote up on Facebook this week from the conference that I was at. And I think it speaks to the trust we need if we're going to continue this journey we're on. It's from a guy named Louis Giglio, whom some of you may have heard of before. He said, "You don't need to know everything about climbing the mountain in front of you to take the next step." Let me repeat that. You don't need to know everything about climbing the mountain in front of you to take the next step. We don't need to understand how this is working or how the coming steps in this journey are going to accomplish our goal. In fact, if we could truly map out this journey ourselves, why would we need God? And so while we mull that over, here's another. How did we do the last time that we didn't need God? How did that work out for us? It's just a question. So I encourage us to take this next step today, to trust in the process, to have faith that this is a journey of restoration and embrace it with the fervor of a starving man at a banquet table. We admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. Why do we take this step? And I mean, for what reasons besides that we trust in the process, just as we've discussed already? Well, this series has all been about looking at the 12 steps and their biblical foundations. So that seems an appropriate place to start, does it not? So what does the Bible have to say about this topic? Well, it's pretty clear-cut, actually. Whether you look at the story of John the Baptist, or the actions of believers in the book of Acts, or in the letter of James to believers, everywhere in the New Testament, you'll find accounts of believers confessing their sins to each other and to God. In James 5:16, we're explicitly commanded to do so even. So we can see from Scripture that this is a practice that's both encouraged and expected. Now, besides being a directive from God, however, why else would we want to engage in confessing?
Get it out on the table and so we can deal with it.
Right? So that's one thing we're hoping to accomplish. If we look at the command that we're given in James, we get a glimpse of why we're to do this. James 5:16 reads, "Confess your sins to each other and pray for each other so that you may be healed." So that you may be healed. Remember, we're on a journey of restoration, aren't we? We're looking to be restored to something, to be healed and regain a former glory. Now, if we break an arm or a leg, we cast it and eventually we go to some physio, don't we? Now we go because the doctor says we should go, and we trust his judgment. But we go ultimately because we want to be healed, to regain our strength and the use of our limb, don't we? We want to be restored to our former abilities, don't we? This step 5, confessing, is no different. We want to be healed from our past actions and negate some future missteps. So how does that happen? Well, what does a physiotherapist get us to do? Specific exercises meant to restore each of the muscles in our arm or leg. Step 5 guides us to exercise each of the pieces involved in our transgressions. That's a fancy word for screw-ups, by the way. So that they can be restored and made healthy again. We're told to confess to God, to ourselves, and to another human being. Those 3 relationships are the muscles we need to address, to move in and bring back to life. And confession is the exercise that does so. Confess to God. I think this is probably the easiest muscle to exercise in this step in some ways. Perhaps because God can seem a bit nebulous. He's not a finite being standing in front of us looking into our eyes. We also have to take into account the fact that God is all-knowing. He already knows our sins, so it's not like a big revelation to him when we confess them, is it? So why is it so hard then sometimes to do this step? Perhaps we find it hard to believe that we can be forgiven. That even God, with all his grace and mercy, would have a hard time looking over what we've done. I get that. Been there. Perhaps, however, if we look at that just a little bit closer, we'll see another truth come out. I'm so bad, I've done stuff so terrible that even God cannot possibly hear my confession and desire to continue on with me. Even God. Who are we to put a limit on God? Are we God? Does that not smell a little suspicious? Perhaps there's a little whiff of pride in the air? Perhaps then the act of confession highlights to us that we are not God. And in doing so helps us to understand him a little bit more. We ask ourselves, how can he forgive? When in light of our knowledge of him and how he is different than us and loves us eternally, the question is more rightly, how can he not forgive? And we can be encouraged by that realization. Now, the act of confession, in my understanding, is 2-part. The first part is an unburdening of ourselves of weight or perceptions or masks that dictate our road forward. The second is the power of witness, which I'll talk about in a minute. Now, when we confess something, it's like we take a piece of heavy clothing off and set it down. It sits there, exposed for all to see and inspect. It now becomes its own entity. Before, it was Brad's jacket. I was wearing it, living in it. Now there's a jacket on the floor. It still belongs to and can be associated with me. But I'm not carrying the weight of it anymore, am I? I'm not being directly influenced or constrained by it, am I? Now, as we confess our wrongs to God, ourselves into another person, like clothing, we shed each piece and take off the burden of the lies and secrets that until that point controlled our path forward. Now, how did these things control us before, dictate what we could do? Well, ever lie about a need to someone? Ever say your kids need some food and then blow the gift on something else? That's just an example. I'm not actually pointing to anybody. We probably avoided that person in that situation, though, that we borrowed from for a while. So we wouldn't have to lie, or perhaps, heaven forbid, get caught in that lie about what we did with the money, right? When we finally confess something, the truth is out there. It might hurt and cause us some shame, but our paths forward suddenly increase exponentially. That path to restored relationship suddenly becomes available again. It may be a bit rough, but access has been granted again. Confess to ourselves. This one can be pretty hard, can't it? Why do you think it's sometimes easier to forgive others than it is to forgive ourselves? Well, we're pretty close to the carnage we created, aren't we? All we need to do is turn around and look behind us, and we can see all the mistakes we've made, all the relationships we've hurt, all the lies we've told. When we look at someone else and what they've done to us, we can somehow differentiate between them and their actions, can't we? We can still end up seeing the value that they have and recognize that their actions didn't match their value. So they can be separated and set aside or forgiven. Well, like I said, we're perhaps too close to our own carnage, and that makes it pretty difficult. So what do we often do? Well, a couple of things. One, we try to rationalize away some of the things that we've done. They weren't that bad, or they were the result of what somebody else did to me. Whatever the rationalization, deep down, we know the truth. And in doing this, we just add one more secret to the pile, don't we? Or secondly, we try to make up for things, don't we? We strive harder to be better, to make amends, to balance the good things, so in the end, it'll all even out. Well, how do we think that works? All we need to do is, again, turn around and look to see all the new stuff on the path that we've made, that we have to make up for. And then we'll realize we'll never catch up. Obviously, neither of these solutions is going to solve our dilemma. So we're back to confessing to ourselves. Instead of trying to justify or repay our screw-ups, why don't we just face them? Call them out of the dark and into the light. By admitting them, we acknowledge our part in them, and we wipe the slate clean to start afresh. We don't have to let the weight of our lies and excuses dictate our paths forward anymore. Confess to another human being. Well, I'm sure that everyone who's ever undertook this journey has asked the question, why? Why do I need to air all my dirty laundry with another person? If God is the master of the universe and ultimately all things I've done are sin against Him, and I can admit this stuff to Him and myself, the other person who was there when all this stuff went down, why do I need to drag a third party in and relive the shame with them? Why indeed? Here in this final confession, I believe, lies one of the greatest benefits of this step. In fact, without this being addressed, I don't know how successful the rest of the journey can be. It's that serious. What is ultimately one of the major factors that lead people to deal with life in unhealthy ways? Now, these unhealthy things may involve the use of drugs or alcohol, or lying, or overeating, or becoming codependent. The list goes on and on. Again, just look behind us and see the path behind us. So again, I ask the question, what is one of the main factors that lead people into unhealthy lives? Loneliness, isolation, a feeling of not belonging, of being apart. It's this lie of the enemy that this part of step 5 addresses. Actually, confessing to God and to oneself do this as well. But confessing to another person supplies us with the tangible proof that we no longer need to believe the lie that we are not a part of something. You see, by admitting our wrongs to another person and having them not run away screaming and damning us, we are restored into relationship with society through the flesh and blood representatives sitting before us. We are no longer the monster looking in through the window at the rest of the people. We are accepted as we are and are welcomed into life with others. That is what is so powerful about this step. A little bit ago I said there were two things about confession that are important. Two pieces of it, if you will. The first was the unburdening of ourselves and the freedom to choose a different path from that point on. The second, the power of witness, I said I would get back to, so here we are. To witness something, according to the dictionary, is to see it, to be able to attest to it as having happened, as in to witness a crime or the witnessing of a signature. Well, when we dig into this step and admit to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs, what are we left with? If we picture the act of confession like stripping off of clothes, one at a time until everything has been unloaded, what are we left with? Our naked bodies. Just us, nothing else. No lies, no baggage, no secrets, no masks, just us and 3 witnesses. God, ourselves, and another human being. Get to see us as we truly are and the value we inherently hold as children of God. And if that's not enough, the even bigger miracle happens. We get to witness our acceptance and restoration into relationship with God, ourselves, and humanity. That's the power of step 5. That's the restoration we're all seeking. That's the miracle that happens when we trust, when we take the next step forward. We get to truly see, to witness our value, and we never have to question it again. So who's in? Now we've been looking at a particular story in the Bible so far in this series. Now can anyone name me that story? Can anyone tell me where to find it? What the reference is?
Luke chapter 15, page 730.
I told you by the end of this series, everyone's going to be able to shout out Luke 15, 11 to 31 when they hear the story of the prodigal son. Now last week, we looked at how the son had come to realize he needed his father's help, and how he recognized how he'd wronged him, how he'd done an inventory. He had decided to return to his father, confess his sins, and throw himself at his father's mercy. That's where I'd like to pick up the story today. So beginning in Luke 15, verse 20. So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." But the father said to his servants, "Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fatted calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." So they began to celebrate. So the son takes a step 5, doesn't he? He goes to his father and he admits his guilt. He admits that he's wronged God, his dad, and himself. He admits to himself that he's the one at fault, that he blew the life that he could have had because now he's looking at a life of servitude. He comes before his father and unloads himself, doesn't he? He strips off his clothes, so to speak, the lies, the hurts, the secrets, bearing himself before God, himself, and another person. And what happens? Do you think it's any coincidence that the first thing his father does is to tell the servants to bring his son the finest robe, a ring, sandals? Those are symbols of who he is, the family he belongs to. Or that his father says to kill the calf they've been preparing for a worthy celebration. Do you think it's any coincidence that such a celebration was meant to include everyone? The father himself says his son was lost but now has been found. Can there be any more of a picture of restoration to be found in admitting our wrongs and opening up paths that were closed before? There's one last thing that I'd like us to look at this story today. The son, when he came to realize his situation and decided to head home, what was his belief? You'll find it in his confession. He believed that he no longer had a place at his father's table, that he was no longer a son, that he didn't belong anymore, didn't he? And what is the first thing we find his father doing? Looking for his son. His son. No question he believed his son still belonged to the family, is there? What the son believed, my friends, is the lie of the enemy. When we think we've blown it, he pounces on that and feeds us that lie that we don't belong. That what we've done is unforgivable and that we've been cast out. We need to remember who really has been cast out. We need to remember we have a Father that is searching for us, waiting for us to appear on the horizon so he can assure us of his love and that we belong to him. Nothing changes that. So take heart, my fellow travelers, as we continue to walk down this path of restoration. We belong here. Our Father has laid the stones ahead of us and is walking side by side with us. What more can we ask for? Now, next week we're going to be looking at step 6 of our journey. So I encourage you to do some digging to discover what that step is and to look again at this story of the prodigal son to see if you can spot any correlations. While it's my job to point out stuff each week, it's a lot more fun when we get to journey together. I'll make sure to stick around after service for some coffee and snacks, because belonging, as we recognize from our step tonight, is an important part of life. And we want everyone to know that you're part of this family. And may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. May the Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. May you keep the rubber side down and your eyes fixed on him. God bless, and we'll see you next week for the next part of our journey.